In 1956, a man reached into a box of spare parts. He pulled out a small electronic component, a resistor, and plugged it into the device he was building. He turned it on. And instead of doing what he expected, the circuit began producing a steady, rhythmic pulse. He stared at it. He checked his notes. He had grabbed the wrong part. The resistor he used was 1,000,000 times more powerful than the one he needed. By any reasonable measure, this was a failed experiment. A mistake. Something to throw away and start over. But something stopped him. Because that pulse, that quiet, steady, rhythmic pulse, sounded almost exactly like something he knew very well. A heartbeat. Wilson Greatbatch sat alone in his barn workshop for a long moment, listening to his mistake. And in that moment, he made a decision that would eventually save the lives of over 3 million people, every single year. This is the story of the wrong resistor that became the most important device ever implanted into the human body. To understand why this matters, you need to understand one thing about the human heart. It doesn't beat on its own. Not really. The heart is a muscle, an extraordinary one, but like every muscle, it needs an electrical signal to tell it when to contract. That signal originates in a small cluster of cells in the upper right chamber called the sinoatrial node. Think of it as the heart's natural metronome. It fires an electrical impulse, the chambers respond in sequence, blood moves through the body. Over and over. Around 100,000 times a day. When that system works, you don't think about it for a single second of your life. When it doesn't work, when the electrical signal becomes erratic, too slow, or stops altogether, the heart loses its rhythm. This condition is called heart block, or more broadly, cardiac arrhythmia. And in the early 1950s, it was essentially a death sentence. Doctors knew what was happening. They could diagnose it. They could watch a patient's heart slow down on a monitor and know exactly why the person was dying. But there was nothing they could do about it. No drug reliably fixed a broken electrical system, and no device small enough to be practical existed yet. The only external pacemakers that existed at the time were the size of a large television set. They were plugged into a wall socket. They kept patients alive, technically, but they were immovable, impractical, and delivered shocks powerful enough to cause burns on the patient's chest. Nobody considered them a real solution. They were a stopgap. A last resort while doctors hoped for something better. Wilson Greatbatch was an electrical engineer at Cornell University. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a cardiologist. He was a man who understood circuits, wires, and current, and who had become obsessed with the idea that electronics might have a role to play inside the human body. In 1956, Greatbatch was working in a small workshop he had built in his barn in upstate New York. He was trying to build a device that could record heart sounds, essentially a small electronic listener that could help doctors monitor arrhythmia patients. It wasn't designed to do anything to the heart. It was purely a recording instrument. He reached into a box of electronic components and pulled out what he thought was a 10,000 ohm resistor. He soldered it into the circuit. He connected the power source. He switched it on. The circuit produced a pulse. Then another. Then another. Steady and rhythmic, firing for 1.8 milliseconds, pausing, firing again. Over and over. Greatbatch looked at the component he had used. It was a 1 megohm resistor, 100 times stronger than what he needed. It had completely changed how the circuit behaved. Instead of a recording device, he had accidentally built a pulse generator. And he immediately understood what he was looking at. He later described the moment in an interview. He said he sat for a while, just listening, and thought, this could drive a heart. Now, here's what separates a great mind from an ordinary one. An ordinary engineer throws away the failed experiment, grabs the right resistor, and builds what he originally planned. Greatbatch didn't do that. He sat with the mistake. He let his mind work around it. He asked himself not, how do I fix this, but what is this actually showing me? He spent the next 2 years miniaturizing the device, refining the pulse rate, and figuring out how to make it small enough and stable enough to function inside a living body. In 1958, he brought his prototype to Dr. William Chardak, a surgeon at the Buffalo Veterans Administration Hospital. Chardak connected it to the exposed heart of a dog in an experimental surgery. The heart, which had been artificially put into a slow, failing rhythm, responded immediately. It synchronized with the device. It beat. Chardak looked at his colleague and reportedly said, "I'll be damned. I think this is going to work." 2 years later, on April 7, 1960, a 77-year-old man named Frank Haenefeld became the first human being in history to receive a fully implantable cardiac pacemaker. Before the surgery, Haenefeld's heart was beating at fewer than 40 times per minute, less than half the normal rate. He was deteriorating. His prognosis without intervention was measured in weeks. Greatbatch's device, about the size of a small hockey puck, was implanted in his chest. It weighed 170 grams. The battery was expected to last 2 years. It lasted 18 months, long enough for Haenefeld to walk out of the hospital, return home, and live an additional 2 years of mobile, functional life. For a man who had been expected to die in weeks, that was extraordinary. But here's something worth pausing on. Greatbatch knew the battery problem was a critical weakness. A device implanted in the human chest that needed to be surgically replaced every 2 years was not a viable long-term solution. So he did something unusual. He didn't wait for someone else to solve it. He contacted Duracell. He worked with battery manufacturers directly. He eventually developed a lithium iodide battery specifically for pacemakers, a battery that could last 10 years. Today, modern pacemaker batteries routinely last 10 to 15 years. That improvement, which Greatbatch pursued himself, is arguably as important as the pacemaker itself. Today, more than 1 million pacemakers are implanted worldwide every single year. The device that was once the size of a hockey puck now fits on a fingertip. Some modern pacemakers are smaller than a large vitamin capsule. They are inserted through a vein without open chest surgery. They communicate wirelessly with monitoring systems. They can detect not just rate, but rhythm irregularities, and adjust themselves in real time. And every iteration, every miniaturization, every improvement, every life saved, traces back to one chain of events. A man building a recording device. A wrong resistor. A rhythmic pulse in a barn in upstate New York. Wilson Greatbatch went on to hold 325 patents in his lifetime. He won the National Medal of Technology. He was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. But in interviews throughout his life, he always came back to that moment in the barn. He called it the most important accident of his career. And he was careful to call it exactly that, an accident. Because he knew that taking full credit would be a kind of dishonesty. The universe had handed him something unexpected. His only real achievement, he said, was deciding to take it seriously. Here's what I keep coming back to, every time I dig into one of these stories. The accidental part of Greatbatch's discovery was maybe 30 seconds long. He grabbed the wrong resistor. The circuit behaved unexpectedly. That's the accident. 30 seconds. Everything else, the 2 years of refinement, the animal trials, the surgical collaboration, the battery research, the human implant, that was relentless, deliberate, exhausting work. The accident opened a door. Greatbatch was the one who decided to walk through it, and then to build everything on the other side. We talk a lot about accidental discoveries as if they're gifts dropped from the sky. And sometimes they are. But they're only useful if the person holding them has the training to recognize what they're seeing, the curiosity to explore it, and the stubbornness to follow it all the way to the end. The wrong resistor was in that box for anyone to grab. Hundreds of engineers might have grabbed it before Greatbatch. They would have called it a mistake, thrown it away, and moved on. 3 million people a year are alive because one man didn't. If you want to hear about another accidental discovery, one where the mistake happened not in a barn or a laboratory, but in a kitchen, and accidentally created the world's most important antibiotic, that story is coming next. And it's even stranger than this one.